Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to ULT San Diego for the Aquarian series. This afternoon, the title of the presentation is The Ear, which is going to be given to us. Both Truth and Jonathan are co-speakers, so that's kind of exciting. There is a reading to get started with. This is from The Voice of the Silence. The pupil must regain the childlike state he has lost ere the first sound can fall upon his ear. The light from the one master, the one unfading golden light of spirit, shoots its effulgent beams on the disciple from the very first. Its rays thread through the thick, dark clouds of matter. Now here, now there, these rays illuminate like sun sparks, light the earth through the thick foliage of the jungle growth. But, O disciple, unless the flesh is passive, head cool, the soul as firm and pure as flaming diamond, the radiance will not reach the chamber. Its sunlight will not warm the heart, nor will the mystic sounds of the Akashic heights reach the ear, however eager at the initial stage. Unless thou hearest, thou canst not see. We give you our very own Truth Collins.
Hello, everyone. Last time when I spoke about the eye, I read an archaeological article about a site where they had a river system which was symbolical of the process of cosmogony, of birth. And what I tried to do in that article was that I drew an analogy between the archaeological site and the process of the eye, with one aspect of it being like the manifest, and one aspect of it being the unmanifest, and with the place in the center being kind of like the eye, that the place of the birth canal in the archaeological site. And so what I was trying to say then is that what we find in a lot of old sites, in tombs and various places of worship, is allusions to various things that people can relate to. And for example, parts of the body. And Alan Boyd Kuhn, he tabulated the correspondences between the four elements as follows: that earth, being tangible, symbolizes the senses. Water symbolizes the emotions, because when we get emotional, there's often perspiration or tears, or associated with that. And air symbolizes the mind, because our thoughts are intangible. We can reach out, but we can't quite grasp our thoughts, no matter how close they are to us. And fire symbolizes the spirit. And so I tied that into this comparison to an archaeological site and the eye. And then I brought in Atlantis, which has circular cities. No, I'm sorry, a circular framework, rings. And that is a typology, in a way, that we find that theme of circular architecture and circular cities around the world. It's not necessarily indicating a place, although it could, and very well does, but it indicates a domain, a category. An area of something to think about. And so when I read the article by Ellen Wahlberg on the ear, I found that she was doing the same thing. She compared the ear to its qualities, which put it in the same domain as, like in a sense, the divine feminine, because hearing is receptive, and the yin is receptive, like the mother aspect, that gives birth to children, that's receptive. And in the presentation that I gave on the eye, I pointed out that in like a common feature is false doors. So at the back of the temple, you have this false door, and it very much resembles like feminine features. And as with biology, it's as if people come out of nowhere and they're born through the mother. So that circle symbolism is also found in what people call stargates. A stargate is a circular architecture, and it's just like an arc shaped like a circle. And so there's all kinds of theories on the internet about how um, you're this is like a wormhole. It's a access to another galaxy, and who knows what's coming through there, all the boogeymen and the demons and pharaohs, and there's a lot of superstition about that. However, it appears to be a symbol which merely alludes to circular things, like pregnant bellies, and stomachs are round when babies are born. And so there's no time or space limit to the mind. Mind is not limited by time or space. It's like 2 + 2 = 4 is still 2 + 2 = 4, no matter when. It could be a million years ago. It could be today. It could be any time in the future. That's why in physics they say that time is an illusion. It's because it's a process, and so that's metaphysics is not necessarily conditioned in that way, whereas physical life is conditioned. Everything that we experience is depending on the conditions of the environment that it's in. So with the ear, it has three bones inside of the inner ear. There are three parts. There's the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. And I must apologize that I didn't have time to make notes, and I don't have all of this memorized, but I'm just going to try to give you a vague idea of some of this. So the ear is, it has an eardrum, which is in the middle ear. And what it is a soft bit of skin, which serves as a barrier between the outside and the inside. And sound waves are social. It's kind of like energy affects what's next to it. And you can compare that to like a bunch of people standing next to each other. It's like somebody says, "Hey," and then the person next to them, they hear them and say, "Oh, hi." And then they say hey to the next person. And it's just like this chain of one atom saying hello to the next atom, and so on and so forth. And that wave of social activity extends out and impacts a distant point. And so that's, in my opinion, that's what it means by those living things we call words. Because if you imagine that everything in the universe is alive in some way, in its own way, at some level, then every element, you could say the elementals, are helping us along and passing along information between each other until it reaches the next person. So we have this chain reaction of cooperation to thank for the next person being able to hear what we said. And so sound, which is this energy, it's air pressure being expanded, and so that pressure expands from a speaker, or a person, and those changes in air pressure reach the eardrum, and they're helped along by the outside of the ear. I think it's well, I forget what it's called, but anyways, this part of the ear here, various outsides of the ear, they absorb sound and also redirect sound towards the inner ear. And that serves as a frame of reference for the ear, so that you're not just getting the sound from the eardrum, but you're getting, this absorption of energy from a different medium. And so we have multiple mediums which help us to have a frame of reference. We're not just relying on the pressure on the eardrum. The eardrum then, as the air pressure moves the eardrum, it moves three little bones. For example, the smallest bones in our body. And then those three little bones are kind of like a chicken leg in a way, the way that it moves, is that there's some flexibility. There's two muscles inside there, which, if you're in a loud environment, they can tighten up on those ear bones and protect your ear. And so it's kind of like resistance. So if you had your legs and you were going to get squashed and you pushed back with your legs, that would protect you so that you're not squashed. And so when we're in loud environments, our ears are actually our brains. It's an all involuntary movement. Our ears will protect us from that loud sound. Now, what's happening is that there's a transduction between physics and physiology. We have these pressure waves moving through the air, and that is translated into liquid, which is our brain's liquid. And so, and it's a very dense liquid. There's like more than one kind of fluid in there. And this is done through the little tiny bones. So the three bones, the movement of those goes into the smallest bone, and this very small point puts pressure on the cochlea. And then the cochlea is shaped like a seashell, which is really fascinating, and it has about 4,000 hairs inside of it. And our hearing range is like 200 hertz to 20,000 hertz, which means that our ears are able to distinguish 20,000 different things at the same time. Now, they have some artificial implants of cochleas, but they only currently have about 20 so far, if I remember correctly. So it is a very muffled sound that people are getting with these implants, but when they have it from childhood, they learn to interpret this muffled sound and make sense out of it better than adults do. But so in any case, there's a transduction from physics and physiology into the water-based body, and those hairs inside of our ear can become damaged. And also, the way that the sound goes through the C-shaped cochlea is how we get the 20,000 different sounds. And each one of those receptors can be made by our attention more sensitive or less sensitive. So it's amazing, because I work with lighting and sound, and I see audio engineers. They get a bit of excitement out of trying to determine what's happening. And at any given moment, there are multiple sounds which are happening, which form what you hear. And there are three sections to the cochlea, and it's interesting because all around the world we have a threefold model, which is the most common framework. We have the underworld, the middle world, and the upper world. And in sound, in our ears, we're hearing a threefold framework, which is the highs, the mids, and the lows. And at the opening of the cochlea, the hairs, what you have first is the high pitches, like the treble, and then in the middle of the ear, those hairs pick up the mids, and then the furthest back in the cochlea, you have the subs or the lows, which are picked up. And if you were to unravel the cochlea, then you get your basic EQ peak meter with all these different levels that you could see. So now the ears do something else which is quite fascinating. They have these three rings, kind of like hula hoops, and these are filled with fluid. And the fluid that moves around in our ears is what gives us balance. And it's also fascinating that it's theorized that this is first developed in fish because why would a fish want to be upside down? It needs to have some sense of up or down. And so with bird ears, they're hidden, but they work well. And with bird song, they learn their song from a tutelary bird, and they practice their songs, and they use their teacher as a frame of reference when they're practicing their songs. And so when you see birds singing, you can congratulate them on their song because they've been practicing that. And they also adapt their song to cities depending on their environment. So they would sing differently depending. And then with, let's see, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Another fascinating thing. Okay, so back to the ears. So the fluid in your ear will tell you, if you're speeding up or slowing down. And if you were to do something that would make you dizzy, this is why it takes time for that to wear off, is because the fluid has to stop moving. All around our body, in all of our joints and in our spine, we have sensors, for lack of a better word. We have our body is sensing all our joints, and that gives us a sense of space. And I forgot the technical term for that, but also in our inner ears with the fluid, that's giving us a sense of where we are. What I mean by that is it's helping us to be oriented. So space, being oriented in space is very close in our bodies to being our physical space, up, down, left, right. That's also happening in the ear. And another thing that we have learned recently from science is that every cell in our body has a sense of pressure. So imagine that you're jogging or you're walking, and so your whole body is moving. That is felt and sensed by every cell in the body. For example, you also have, I think it's called opines cells on the surface of your skin that can sense light, especially UV light. And they suspect that it's used for healing. For example, if you had a cut and these cells were exposed to the UV light, then that would tell the body that that part of the skin needs to heal. And so even if you have a sleep mask on, but you fall asleep with the lights on, then in a sense, your body knows that the lights are still on. And this is also true of the body, that every cell in the body knows when movement and changes in pressure are occurring. Let me see what time it is, 4:50. I think I should I'll just go one more thing before giving Jonathan a chance. So what's happening here is that we have perception and apperception. So perception is like the senses, and then apperception is mental in a way. And so there is a mental process involved in hearing. For example, tinnitus, it involves phantom perceptions. And And so these are not real sounds that you're hearing if you have ringing in the ears. And with synesthesia, for example, the associations that people have in their minds between things, and these, in my opinion, this can come from previous lives. So let's say in a previous life, you really liked the color blue and you really liked the number 5 for whatever reason. And so maybe, because you like those things in this lifetime, you always associate the number 5 with blue. And this is the mind interpreting the senses. And so that is a metaphysical aspect. You have the brain, which is doing all the mechanical work for you of trying to determine what's being heard and compensating and protecting you so you don't go deaf. And also earwax, we should talk about that. It's not good to shove Q-tips in your ear because you're shoving the earwax down into your ear and you could be putting pressure on your eardrum. And it's also creating a barrier that makes it harder for your eardrum to flex and move in response to changes in air pressure. So if you do use Q-tips in your ear, just make sure you're not shoving things down in your ear. Maybe you've got an itch and you just want to get the edge of it, but don't shove anything down there. But the earwax is to protect your ear, and it's also you have little hairs in there which also protect your ear from tiny animals. So with the perception and apperception, the mind is interpreting all the work that the body is doing for us, and so we have to stop and listen, because this happens a lot in online chat, and you try to write something on a social media site and then somebody replies and it's got nothing to do with what you wrote, and like, where did this come from? So that happens in our own minds when we're hearing, and so we have to be careful not to project what we think and have that color what we're actually hearing. And so with that, I'll pass it on to Jonathan.
Okay, well, thank you, Truth, very much for the description of the ear, and it's very mysterious, this ear. I mean, why do we even have ears? How did we even get them? And Truth did allude to that with the idea is it really has to do with the, at least at a physical level, the evolution of the fish. And that it's interesting that their sense of balance was evolved prior to their sense of hearing. And so evolutionarily, hearing is going to have a lot to do with balance. And what my job is going to be is to try to say a few things that are kind of actually based on Truth's talk, but to see how that the ear is not only an analogy, but it's a direct emanation or unfoldment of some mystical truths that. So, in other words, it's not just like how did it come to be, but hopefully by the end we'll see the idea that because of these mystical realities, that's how the ear came to be. So we'll see if we can pull that one off. So, and I think that it has a lot to do with the theosophical concept of the akasha. So, Truth mentioned that he mentioned this word transduction. And if I can recall that correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It had to do with going from the mechanical vibration of sound as a mechanical process to a more subtle process of at least going to the electrochemical by the time you get to the inner ear. And then really, because science these days, they talk about perceptual processes as being accountable to the higher centers in the brain, the more advanced and complex regions of the brain, perceptual. But it's interesting at the same time, sound is still attributed to being something quite mechanical. Atoms, uh, billiard balls bouncing against each other. Energy goes through wavelengths, through tumbling air molecules, and reaches the ear after somebody has said something. But there's something much more mystical theosophically than that to this idea of sound. And when Monica read the reading, the reading included the part about the mystic heights and the Akasha and so forth. And then there was a footnote in there that talks about that these mystic heights of the Akasha has to do with the Anahad Shabd. Okay. And the Anahad Shabd is refers to a kind of sound that is not created by normal means of making sounds. The normal means that we think of is when one thing is against another, or you pluck a guitar string or something like that. There's something that causes that wavelength on the physical plane. That's actually the ahad sound. The anahad sound is not that. It refers to the mystical sound that is always in the cosmos. So that's and the voice of the silence is talking about being able to hear that sound. And it says that you have to return to the childlike state and so forth, and that the soul has to be pure. And there's a certain criteria to be able to hear that mystic sound. So how do we get from the normal ahad sound that goes through the ears and is depicted by science as being mechanical, all the way to this mystical sound that reverberates throughout the cosmos theosophically and accounts for life itself? Well, it accounts for the fact that everything even exists at all because of this omnipresent, eternal sound that is also called the Nada Brahman, I think, by Judge in one of his articles. So we see that in another mystical text, besides the voice of silence, in The Light and the Path, there is reference to the idea that life itself has speech, and that everything about life is speech, and that we ultimately we are that speech. So it's not something foreign to us. Furthermore, speech is not a cry, it says, but instead it's a song. And that if we are attentive, we can hear that song, and what's more, we can hear the melody of that song. And that we can, in the beginning, we can never hear the full melody, but we can hear fragments of that melody. And that it says in this case that whenever you can hear life's melody, to remember it, to cherish it, to pay attention to it, because by this you're storing something in your deeper soul memory that is worth focusing on. So in that way, I always say that during theosophical lectures, just for example, now this is, people do what they want. I say things like, don't take notes, because then you're distracting yourself from the melody of the meeting. Because if you really pay attention and you cherish the melody coming from another soul or another speaker, if you really are paying attention to them as a soul, you're going to remember that moment for the rest of your life. Whereas if you take notes, you're going to remember it for a couple of weeks, if that makes any sense. But it also, in that Light in the Path, it talks about how that life is fundamentally a harmony. So it's a song with a melody, but also with a harmony. And that harmony is not something that's separate from oneself. One actually is that harmony. And that the harmony is based on law. It's the law of harmony. And so it's really a universe of law, and that by paying attention to that harmony, which is really a unity of diversities, that one is becoming to the point where they respect that harmony so much that one actually learns to actually obey that harmony. They'll feel it and they'll sense it as something to be obeyed. So these are very mystical topics here. So how do we get from this idea of a mechanical idea of sound to a mystical one? And again, we think it has to do with this idea of the Akasha. And the first way that a student, we think, gets a sense for the Akasha, besides looking it up in the glossary, and fundamentally, it's a word for the word space. Okay, it's a Sanskrit word for space, but it's really like metaphysical space. It's mystical space, if there is such a thing. And well, what can we know? Well, it'll say things like, well, its fundamental attribute is sound. So there's this ubiquitous, omnipresent, causal, durable, immortal reality throughout all of space that is space. Theosophically, space is not empty. It would be like saying that the ocean is empty. Well, no, it's full of life. It's teeming with life. There's fish and there's all kinds of beings in the ocean that we don't even know. We haven't even categorized all of the different species and so forth that there are in the ocean. Well, theosophically, in space is no more empty than the ocean is empty, and it's teeming with life. And when you think about it, the solar system, the sun, the planets, all of us are going through space at hundreds of thousands of miles an hour through these all these different hierarchies and realities of mystical beings that are in space, and we call them the elementals. So, but ultimately, so that's what the Akasha is. And the Akasha is actually on a spectrum, that there are the spiritual heights, the mystic heights of the Akasha, like the voice referred to, all the way down to the more astral entities of the Akasha, which is at the lower planes. So the Akasha functions in a universe of law, and it's a law of balance, of cause and effect, and of alignment, really. So our first sense of the Akasha spiritually is really a sense of spiritual balance. That's the beginning, because balance has to do with orientation, as Truth already mentioned, and that every cell in the body and this evolutionary aspect of balance preceding actually the ability to hear really grows out of a sense of balance and orientation. So, but in the mystical life, that would translate to the idea of having a sense of balance. Now, the Buddha always talked about the middle way, nothing in excess, nothing in extremes, navigating the course of the middle way. And also in the Gita talks about the self-governed sage has a sense of equanimity, is not troubled by this, not troubled by that. Values lead is the same as gold, and so forth, is not taken in by these things. So that's a sense of balance. So that would be a centering in a spiritual orientation, you could say. Also, when we cannot take ourselves, our personalities, too seriously, and we can become centered in a cause and in a reality that's larger than ourselves. And actually, as Gandhi would say, to reduce the personality to a zero, or as HPB, I believe, said in the Key to Theosophy, to reduce the sense of the personality to a cipher. But at the same time, one is aligning themselves with the cosmos, really, and with a sense of duty towards the whole. So this is kind of an Akashic kind of a centering that I just wanted to pay attention to with reference to the beginnings of some kind of a mystical hearing, really. So it has to do with balance and orientation. Now, I would like to invoke a little bit of reference here to a little bit of storytelling in the Mahabharata. And there, in the Mahabharata, there is the idea of sound very much. First of all, you have Krishna, who's the main player, really. And you have the flute of Krishna, the beautiful melodious speech of Krishna, and so forth. But also you have the idea of the conch shell, Krishna's conch shell, which is interesting because when Truth was talking about was it the cochlea?
Cochlea.
Is that the one that was shaped like the seashell?
Yes.
This is me putting things together. It's going out on a limb here. But that seems to be very interesting because that the conch shell, which figures very importantly in the Mahabharata, which has to do with the great battle that we are all facing and fighting in relation to the lower self in order to get control of the vehicles in the vesture, in order to be able to perform service. That this really figures into this thing about mystical hearing, because really because pretty much everything that these great beings in the Mahabharata had as a possession had a name to it. It had its own life to it. So like, for example, Arjuna had the Arjuna's bow called the Gandiva. And Arjuna himself had a conch shell, and that was called the Devadatta. But Krishna's conch shell was called the Panchajanya. So I'm going to try and pronounce that more than once in this storytelling of things. Well, it turns out that the Pandavas, who are the ones who are trying to regain their kingdom and who have actually Krishna on their side, because one of them, Arjuna, asked for Krishna to be his charioteer. They are very much hearing this Panchajaya, and when Krishna sounds this conch shell sound, which can just rings out for miles, it gives heart and courage and endurance and hope to all of the Pandava brothers. Now, there is another brother of theirs who is not one of the Pandavas, and he's called Karna. And Karna was born by the same mother, but before she was ever wed, she discovered that she had the power to invoke the gods. And all of the Pandava brothers actually are from different gods. But when she was very, very young, she invoked the sun. And so along comes Karna, actually. And because the son became the father and Kunti was the mother, and so this divine birth happened, and it was Karna. And she was too young to take care of the child. So he was raised by shepherds and so forth, but he does figure back into the Mahabharata. Now, the word Karna apparently has to do with hearing, so that's why he figures into this. Karna is always insecure about his own centering. He's out of center with himself. He's this great being, he's this magnanimous being, he wants to give to the world, okay? But he has a hard time finding his own moorings. You can understand why. Because he knows that there's greatness, but everything is just so complex and confusing for him. So he becomes, because his name has to do with hearing, he becomes very good at hearing gossip, at hearing intrigue, at hearing maybe the kind of information that the CIA is interested in, all these kind of horizontal things that are not really spiritual. Okay, and so it's one thing to be able to hear really well, but are we really turning our ear in the right direction? And that's kind of the question of karna. And so there is this word in the Mahabharata called the Karna Parampara. Normally we think of the Guru Parampara, which is the chain of gurus, right? But with the Karna Parampara, that's like a chain of gossip, really, or a chain of intrigue, or a chain of did you know that such and such is true, and so forth. And poor Karna, what he had the problem of is that he was so concerned about what other people thought of him or what he thought of other people. Really, we would almost say that that's like eighth grade, right? That he couldn't uh, get really focused on what was important. And he ended up on the side of the Kauravas, okay, on the wrong side. But he's so magnanimous that he gave him everything, you know. Um, Now, there is the idea of what about this conch shell from Krishna? When Karna could hear the conch shell, to him it was just a calculation. Okay, it was just like, okay, that's happening, so we know where the Pandavas are now. So now we know where there's some orientation. Okay, but that you see how that's more battle strategy kind of level of thinking. When Yudhishthira, who is the eldest brothers of the Pandavas, when he heard Krishna's mighty conch shell that was full of fire and full of fohat and full of courage and full of daring and full of fearlessness, Yudhishthira had the thrill of hope. But when Arjuna heard the Panchajanya, this conch shell from Krishna, he recognized that something more. He recognized something more because remember, there's a very close intimacy of Arjuna and Krishna. He recognized the beloved song of his teacher and of his mentor and of his elder brother. He was aware of his vestures to the point of knowing that, yes, sound comes in, and that, as was said before, there's a passive element to listening naturally. And that, yes, the sound goes through the outer ear, through the middle ear, mechanical processes, and then eventually does this transduction to these more ethereal processes. And as we said, we're trying to say before that the Akasha is really the element that accounts for all transmission from the physical to the metaphysical to the sublime metaphysical. But Arjuna, when he could hear this conch shell, he could also sense a reverse order. That really it was like his own higher self was speaking through him in reverse order. So from his own higher self, through his very much attuned personality, who is attuned to his higher self, through the inner ear, through the inner middle ear, and out. So it was as if it was his own voice. And when he heard that Panchajanya sound, he knew what to do. He entered the battle without any kind of delay, without any kind of hesitation, because to him it was his own voice. And it was his own higher self speaking. It was his own conscience. It was his own call to duty, his own call to action, you could say, that sometimes great teachers bring to the occasion. And so it was without hesitation, without cavil or delay, you could say. And he knew what to do. His body, his whole mind, his whole being flew into action. And he was able to not only fight the war, but to win that war. And again, this whole war thing is really an analogy for the battle that we all undergo in relation to raising the consciousness of our lower vestures such that we can be of service to humanity. So we'll have time for questions.
Yeah, Judy Saltzman.
Yeah, just go ahead.
Go ahead, Judy.
Hello. Thanks to you both for very excellent talks about the functions of the physical ear and then the more metaphysical ear. I was thinking that my cats can hear much better than I can. Of course, dogs can, and many animals we know, at least on the physical level, they don't have higher minus capability. They can hear an earthquake before it starts. For example, they'll start going crazy a minute before we hear and feel the earthquake. And they can also smell better and see in the dark and such. But I think when a master like Jesus of Nazareth says, having eyes see ye not, having ears hear ye not, he's talking about the Akasha. That why can't we get our vehicles into a higher consciousness from which he is speaking, which he has attained, but we haven't. And out of compassion, of course, he wants us to. And don't we need to try to get to that level beyond physical hearing and seeing, and because there are two other senses beyond our five. We know this, there are seven senses that can manifest in one inner sense, but we don't necessarily have it on our daily basis. So I wondered if you could address this more about how we can move into a higher consciousness of hearing, because the voice of the silence is full of it, and that places where it talks about the sounds you hear as you go through stages of meditation, like the trumpet blasts, for example. And of course, it isn't to be taken literally, but it's analogous.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Judy. Truth will answer it. No, I'm just kidding. Vijay, is that camera on both of us? But it's on both of us? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I have something to read about that. There's a quote by H.B. Blavatsky from Hermes Magazine, and it's titled Spirit, Voice, and Word. And so one way to figure out how to listen is to question what speech is, and then we know what to listen for. And so it kind of starts with consideration of other people. And so a lot of the times people start with the presupposition that it's all about them, and then the problem is them, and the solution is them, and the it's just like you're completely missing the fact that there's another person required to have a conversation. And so so we can contemplate like what it means for someone else to say something to us, and that may be helpful in attaining like a listening state of mind. So this quote from H.P. Blavatsky, Spirit, Voice, and Word. What is the difference between spirit, voice, and word? The same as between Atma, Buddhi, and Manas in one sense. Spirit emanates from the unknown darkness, the mystery into which none of us can penetrate. That spirit, call it the spirit of God or primordial substance, mirrors itself in the waters of space or the still undifferentiated matter of the future universe, and produces thereby the first flutter of differentiation in the homogeneity of primordial matter. This is the voice, pioneer of the word, or the first manifestation, and from the voice emanates the word or logos. That is to say, the definite and objective expression of that which has hitherto remained in the depths of the concealed thought. That which mirrors itself in space is the third logos. We may express this trinity also by the terms color, sound, and numbers. And so, I don't have an answer to your question, but there's lots of different methods of meditation. And with the Noble Eightfold Path, it's pointed out that the obstructions to achieving meditation are being in harmony with the rest of yourself, which is described as right livelihood, right thought, all these things that you have to get right in order to be in attunement with nature and with yourself, in order to not be polluting your mind. If your mind is polluted, then you're not going to be able to make sense of your senses, and if your senses are polluted, they're not going to be giving you accurate information. And so it's kind of goes both ways.
Does anybody in the audience have any thoughts, Monica?
Yeah.
Just listening to what you just said. So purification gives us access to more subtle planes in terms of sound. Is that what I'm hearing you say? With the Eightfold Path, for instance, of Buddhism, that talks about right speech, right, So I guess my question is, like in the case of Arjuna, in the Gita, where is he hearing from? Is he hearing? I'm wondering if the conversation could be translated into and a connection with a more subtle plane, and that sort of uh, gives an idea that is expressed in conversation in the Gita. In other words, as a warrior, he could be, he's looking for answers and asking questions about this battle. And is this just for our human benefit that we perceive it in the way that we do? But is there another perspective from which we can see this ourselves as Arjuna, perceiving from a more subtle plane an idea or a way to go in whatever circumstance? I'm sorry that took so long.
Well, it seems like from what you read in the voice here, that it says, O disciple, unless the flesh is passive, you're talking about purification.
Yeah.
Head cool, the soul is firm and pure as flaming diamond. The radiance will not reach the chamber. So it's talking about a light and a sound, okay? And you could say that it's like the light of the logos, but it's also the sound of the logos, you could say also.
Mhm.
Um,
And isn't the combination of those two a directive or an inspiration that, say, our intuition can translate into a very practical action?
yeah, I would think so. The HPB says that the intuition is like the instinct of the soul, and the more we use our intuition, the more we get used to using our intuition, and we start, and even through mistakes, then all that's part of the whole refinement process. But the soul knows. They used to talk about how we only use 10% of the brain. Remember that? Theosophically, we probably only use like a millionth part of the wisdom that we already have.
Wow.
That we only, manifest such a small a part of what who we really are as souls, as old souls. And Judy talked about kind of getting in contact with the Akasha. One of the things also about the Akasha is that it's not fragmented; it's continuous. And remember, in I think it's the second chapter, where Krishna talks to Arjuna and he says, because first Arjuna, he's got the problem of he doesn't really want to fight the war. And so he's decided he's going to be depressed. He's going to sit down and he doesn't know what he's going to do. We've all been there. But Krishna just says, no, you're a warrior. You got to remember that. But then he goes into the metaphysics of things and he says, look, you're an ancient soul and so am I. And that you in this whole battle thing, there's no such thing actually as killing anyone because everybody's really immortal. But the thing is what he's really talking about is the immortality of the soul. And so you're grieving for that which really can't be lamented. Think about, and there must be something really durable and lasting and worth lasting when it talks about the immortality of the soul. And we've had a few talks recently, and we're going to have more talks about the immortality of the soul. But that is really like the personality is made out of the astral substances and so forth. But the reincarnating ego has to do with the Akasha.
Thank you.
Who else? Does anybody else have something to offer?
No, but we'd like to invite you to raise your hand. Here we have David Grossman.
Hi there. I was thinking when we were talking about sound in the New Testament, John, first there was the Word. The Word was God, or the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Well, what good is a word unless there's sound to hear it? I mean, there has to be a receptor to the word. And along with that, I just wanted to connect. Maybe one thing that wasn't touched on is the baby in the womb. I believe the first sense the baby really uses is the auditory. The auditory. The child in the womb, I guess, can hear the mother after about 4 months or something. So it seemed that that's activated very early in our development. Sight being the last, because the baby in the womb doesn't need any sight. So so that's the last to really develop, I guess. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw those out. So sound is working from the very beginning in our life cycles, you might say.
Well, on a human level, the word was involved in the relationship that was developed with the parents before the child was born. The way that people speak to each other, the word brought about that. A lot of people never ask what came before the Big Bang. So those sorts of questions, like how did these parents end up hanging out together? How, did they like the sound of each other's voices?
Yeah, there's another thing about birth and even death that my understanding is that, like in the East and in ancient cultures, that they kind of assume that the first breath or the first sound that the baby makes is something of the sound of the AUM. Because, if you say the AUM sound, it starts here and then progresses its way forward in the throat, with the 3 syllables, A and U, A-U-M, and even the last breath is something like that, where that it's the breathing process of exhaling. And there's something of that. So there's something very much punctuating the beginnings and the endings of things, and I would assume throughout the middle, and then also the AUM has the idea of Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. It starts with the A, which is Brahma, the U, which would be the Vishnu, the preserving, and then the Shiva, which would be the destruction, but also the regeneration. So,
But the Aum is sort of like, I guess we could say the Aum is the process of manifestation,
yeah,
externalization.
yeah,
If sound and breath are connected, I think you hit on it, Jonathan.
Yeah.
There's no sound without breath, in a sense. If you're,
yeah, I like that. Yeah, breath,
Great breath.
Mhm.
There you go.
very helpful. And we're talking about such high themes, it's almost hard to kind of get traction on it. And yet, as you're pointing out, David, it's fundamental to everything that we do. And these last year we had a presentation on the eye, the Truth did actually, and this year we have the ear, and then I think Monica just now said that we're going to have one on the nose in about a month from now.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
And so these kind of basic things that we take for granted, there's this deep mystical thing. And if you ever wondered, well, how did all these systems get going?
Yeah.
You know, but the thing is that they, like even breath, there's a spiritual dimension to breath, and even the whole cosmos is thought to be the great breath, you know, by the ancient sages. So even breathing is considered to be the most sacred thing that a person can even think of, really, because the whole universe is doing that.
That is so gorgeous. And it seems it once we get clear that nothing is disconnected,
Mm-hmm.
then I think everything in mind takes on a more sacred
Mm-hmm.
tone in our assessment, no matter what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a question, Truth. You spoke of, now I can't remember the name of it, but you said something like thousands of hairs.
Yes. In our inner ear, there are thousands of little hairs that move with the changes in the fluid. So these are not hairs which are outside of the ear, like hairs on your head.
Right.
They're hairs within the fluid of the cochlea.
I see.
And so when the little tiny bone in the ear puts a lot of pressure on a very small point, what it's doing is it's taking the energy from the air and transducing it, transforming it into a pressure point, which moves the fluid. Okay. So it's a hydraulic energy.
Wow.
And so this hydraulics within the ear is the fluid moving around, like vibrations and fluid. It is moving these hairs, and we have individual control over these 20,000 different receptors or sensors within our body, which is mind-boggling to think that you can choose to listen to one frequency out of 20,000.
Amazing. I thought perhaps that all of those hairs were a protection.
Those are on the outer ear.
Okay.
You have hairs like hairy ears. You have
Okay.
hair in your ear, and then they keep the bugs out and little critters. But within the cochlea itself, if I remember correctly, within the fluid, you have these what's referred to as hairs, and they can be damaged. And quite often, it is the high frequencies that people lose first, because as you go through the cochlea, which is shaped like a seashell, the base is at the end of it. And so what's at the front of it, those hairs, so to say, those are damaged first because they're the most exposed.
Exposed. I see. Thank you. Amazing.
There's another side of listening that I would like to bring out. And to be honest, where I got the idea from was from an article which was from the Theosophical Movement about 7 or 8 years ago. And it was called Thoughts on Theosophical Meetings. And to me, it's an incredible article because it talks about the incredible potency of what Theosophical meetings have to offer. And to me, it was quite appropriate, right following our meeting last week on ULT Day, which was very fine. The meeting that talked about last week, one of the fine points that was brought out was the idea of the derivation of the word lodge. And it was gone into that there was two ideas with that. One was the idea of logos, and the other was the idea of a refuge or a safe place, a shelter. That was the word, shelter. And so then he said, actually, so in that sense, the lodge is a shelter for the logos. And all this has to do with the mystic side of sound. It's a safe place for these high ideas, really. But this article from the Theosophical Movement, Thoughts on Theosophical Meetings, it was talking about the incredible importance of the listener. Matter of fact, 2/3 of the article is talking about the listener and what the listener brings to a theosophical meeting. And it talks about how that the listener brings to a meeting much more than they will ever know. And that they provide an audience and a sounding board for these ideas to go out into the world. And now, just as an aside, not in this article, there's the idea that when teachers teach, great teachers like the Buddha, they're talking on at least 3 different planes: the terrestrial, the astral, and the celestial. And that there are different kinds and categories of beings, that can hear at these different levels that participate. So even at our normal level that we don't think of as being super mystical, we go to a theosophy meeting, we think that it must be doing something good. I'm going to receive something good, and maybe I'll be able to transmit something. But that there is very much the potential, the opportunity to give something by attending theosophical meetings and by rotating and speaking and so forth, but also by listening, that they are giving something that is very significant, and that there's a rapport that's built between the speaker and the listeners, and that's really important. And then that the regular attendees of meetings become very, very important. And that when a listener, as a student listener, becomes a regular attendee, they are offering something of their magnetism to the meeting. And so then, if the meeting has regular attendees, then the real current of that meeting that goes from one meeting to another, that becomes made out of the individual contributions of magnetism that all the different regular attendees offer. And then, of course, the article even goes on to the point of saying when the regular attendees don't show up, then you can tell that there's a kind of a setback or something, or a little bit, it's a temporary thing, that's noticeable. Almost like perhaps if a person is trying to develop a regular current of meditation every day, and then for whatever reason they get pulled off, there's a feeling that's a little bit different, something kind of like that. So anyway, it's an incredible article, and I'd be happy to send it to anyone who would like it. They can just respond to the emails that you get.
That would be great. That sounds like you were describing like the ideal sangam, the true meaning of a sangam is the collective mind receiving the teachings and imbibing and anchored in the heart, and not necessarily speaking one word to another person.
That's the thing.
But going out into the world, into their normal activities, and it radiates out. The same thing the same way something not so great radiates out. So a Sangam gives us a chance. So just
No,
the
it's
thought.
almost like the mystical technology of theosophical broadcasting. I mean, it's one thing to send all this out on Zoom, or we could even put it out on YouTube as a live broadcast. But it's this it's kind of hard to talk about because it sounds a little bit zany sometimes. But this idea that when human beings come together, like you say, in a Sangha situation, the broadcasting that takes place throughout the globe, because the globe is very much interconnected,
Right.
Much more than we think, you know.
Mhm.
And also the other thing that article brought out is it's actually a theosophical meeting that very much has the potential to draw down higher unseen energies. And they're trying to be reticent, you can tell in the article. But it's the idea that there is an invisible Sangam, okay, of adepts and Mahatmas, okay, a brotherhood and a sisterhood, a Sangam of sentient beings, of you could say a brotherhood of bodhisattvas, that in the context of theosophical meetings, that can become a lens, so that higher current can become reflected in this world, and in all three worlds, you could say. Truth, are you saying that somebody's trying to get in a word edgewise?
Oh, yes.
That's good.
And just to follow up with what Monica said, these are called hair cells, and there are 15 to 20,000 hair cells in each ear. And these hair cells, they convert sound vibrations into electrical signals that the brain can interpret. They go up the brain stem, and you know. So Carolyn Dorrance, would you please go ahead, Carolyn?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. I think you've already answered this question, perhaps more than once, but I was fascinated by the direction your talk took. It's common when people are first exposed to theosophy to hear about the spiritual absolute, and to experience Alaya is the main aim and purpose. But you kind of then switched into a focus on balance. And balance suggests there's at least some kind of duality. And that duality requires the task of harmony, which we all know can be very difficult, particularly at higher, more complex levels of reality. And we have enough trouble with balance just at the physical level. And I'm at the age where that's a constant need. So it's almost as if hearing requires a constant dialectic in this field of duality. And that's where you put a lot of emphasis on that. And that may suggest that the whole operation of karma must be thought of as a dialectic. It's not just, if we experience something, it's not just singular. There's always going to be something else that will come, with that experience, or people might react differently, or you might react differently. So balancing this dialectic seems like a really, really difficult task, and never ending, so to speak. And forgetting is a problem, because then we forget half of what we need to do. So I just wonder if you would, yes, despite the universal unity in all manifestation, it does seem that very early on we have to recognize and deal with duality, because there can't be harmony, and you could say there can't be progress, there can't be learning with our coping with duality, and that's what harmony requires. So, you have any comments about that?
Just the theme of attunement and the various methods, like when people, it's like the sort of the relationship between the higher mind and the lower mind, that the lower mind isn't in opposition to the higher mind, but in alignment with it. Jonathan?
I really appreciate the question.
Yeah,
And
me
you were
too.
you were really articulating things so much better than I could. And I was thinking, I hope she doesn't turn this into a question. But no, it's really fine. The thing about if there's such thing as balance, then there must be some kind of dualities to navigate somehow, and like this, which has to do with attunement, finding the center, right? So some of the things that came to mind when you were talking, one thing that occurred to me is that goes into the idea of deep listening, right? That Thich Nhat Hanh was talking about. And what was he talking about? He was talking about the same thing that Judge is talking about in Letters That Have Helped Me, where it's really important to learn to listen to others and to not be trying to assert our points. And we're not just listening long enough so that they won't accuse us of cutting them off. Okay, it's not that thing. You're doing listening because you really want to know where a person's coming from. And so that, right, and let's say that there was, okay, because in ancient times, in a lot of the mystery schools, and in the training of like the Dalai Lama and so forth, and at the training at the University of Nalanda, debate was a big part of the training, really. And even now, debate societies are part of intellectual rigor and training, you could say. But let's say, what if there could be a kind of debate where two debaters were really interested in where the other one was coming from, not just to be polite and not just to get kicked off the debating team, but authentically interested? Because look, if I'm debating with somebody, I'm dealing with a reincarnating ego that's millions of years old. Okay. So aren't I really going to want to really learn from them where they're coming from? Because what an opportunity, right? And hopefully they're thinking that about me. So the debate thing would almost turn into almost a love fest, if that's that kind of a thing. But it'd be two minds really trying to get to the truth, to the point where almost the two thinkers would lose track of what their original position was, because they're really trying to get to the truth. But see, there's a dialectic involved with that, where the person is really interested in what the other person is bringing to the table. Can you imagine how that would elevate public discourse? Instead of the name calling and so forth that we have. That was a couple of things that came to me, and also kind of a dialectical mobility. What if more of us knew about Plato's divided line, where you have becoming, which is below the divided line, and you have being, which is above the divided line. The becoming is images and opinions. The being is models and noesis. So models is like 2 + 2 = 4, the way you were talking about before. And these are models that work at all times. So this is above the realm of opinions, okay? Like, it doesn't matter when 2 + 2 = 4, that's just how it is. But noesis has to do with that which is noetic and noumenal and so forth. But what if we had more of a sense for that kind of a dialectical mobility to know where we are at any given point, where we're coming from? That seems like that would illuminate that whole dialectical process so that we could have, it'd be like a tool perhaps that we could use to do deep listening.
We have one last question from Arun. We're getting close to the end of our time here. But please go ahead, Arun. I don't know where he went.
Is that Arun from Kenya?
I think so, but he just disappeared.
True.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Hey, look, I didn't think I had a question, but I'm enjoying it tremendously. I'm a musician and I've learned a lot from today's lesson, but I really would like that article that Jonathan had mentioned about theosophical meetings. So I don't have anything to ask. It must have been a mistake somewhere. Thank you.
Anybody who wants that article, just reply to the email that Truth just now sent out and just say, hey, I'd like the article. Okay, well, are we about at the end of our time?
Yes.
Oh, there is one thing. What time is it exactly?
5:53.
Oh, it really is getting there. But there is something that I was wondering if I could get Monica to read. Would you mind reading something from the Jewel?
Absolutely.
It has to do with sound. It's reading 521. The reading number is 521. Here's the book itself.
I'll
So-
just go over here.
Yeah. Oh, but Jay, could you aim the camera at, yeah, so
You say 523?
521, that's the reading number.
Okay.
And it has to do with sound and the unique nature of sound. And next week, while she's looking for that, by the way, we will be having a meeting on the Republic of Conscience. So I think it's going to be a very amazing meeting. And by the way, see, that has to do with this. See how all these themes, they go into each other, is that we're talking about listening to an inner voice. Then the next week, what is it? It's the Republic of Conscience, which is actually a phrase from HPB.
Is this right? It is very long.
It is
Two
kind of long.
pages.
Well, the 2 full pages? Oh,
Close. So where should I start? Right here?
yeah, let me see. Yes,
Okay.
and just say where it's from, though.
Okay, this is from Jewel in the Lotus. The title is Turning Inward. And it's from Surangama Sutra. The Bodhisattva Manjusri arose from his seat, bowed low at the feet of the Buddha, and chanted this gatha with reverence. Perfect and pellucid is the nature of the Bodhi ocean. Pure and unflawed, the dazzling essence of Bodhi. When its inner luminosity shone forth, it formed a field which eclipsed its radiant nature. Thus, from delusion arose a relative emptiness, wherein illusory worlds were arbitrarily built. Stabilizing itself, thinking created the continents, while the deluded knower became a living being. This voidness formed with Bodhi is only a bubble in the ocean. When this bubble bursts, the unreality of the void is revealed. How much more of that, of the 3 worlds? Though all return to the one at the source, there are manifold methods for doing so. In truth, thou honored by the world, all Buddhas appear in this world to teach the most suitable method, that of using omnipresent sound. Samadhi can be reached by making use of hearing.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming.